Whitehaven Springs was the kind of picture postcard American community that inspired realtors' brochures and retirement dreams. Nestled between rolling hills on the outskirts of a mid-sized city, it boasted well-tended lawns, a charming main street dotted with antique shops and bakeries, and a sprawling suburban development known as Lakecrest Heights. Lakecrest Heights was governed by its Homeowners Association, HOA. Newcomers often remarked on the neighborhood's impeccable landscaping and neat rows of pastel-colored homes. Yet beneath this idyllic facade lurked a potent force. Certain HOA board members reveled in wielding their authority. These self-appointed guardians of property values were quick to fling fines and warnings over the most minor infractions. Among them, none was more infamous than Bernice Andrews, dubbed Karen by exasperated neighbors. A tall woman in her early 50s, Bernice wore her hair in a stiff coiffed bob and spoke in clipped sentences that left little room for disagreement. She was newly elected as vice president of the HOA, a position she treated like the helm of a kingdom. For the most part, Bernice's meddling involved standard complaints: trash bins not hidden well enough, holiday decorations left up a day too long, or grass an inch higher than the CCR, covenants, conditions and restrictions, standards. But her big break, her grand crusade, came when she discovered a supposedly unsanctioned access gate at the far end of a local property. Bernice's unilateral attempt to assert control over that gate would unleash a crisis that endangered thousands of people, sparking a race against time to restore a lifeline of essential medical supplies. This is the story of how a single act of gate locking, committed in the name of HOA compliance, spiraled into a full-blown emergency that changed Whitehaven Springs forever. Long before Lakecrest Heights was built, the land was part of a large estate belonging to an eccentric millionaire who donated part of it to the county hospital. Over time, the area evolved. The hospital expanded and eventually became the Whitehaven Springs Regional Medical Distribution Center, a specialized facility responsible for storing and distributing critical medical supplies to outlying clinics, senior centers, and smaller hospitals across the county. When a portion of the estate was converted into a residential neighborhood, county planners left a narrow, half-paved road weaving through the rolling hills behind the new houses. This tiny thoroughfare, known locally as Old Oak Pass, provided a convenient shortcut for supply trucks traveling from the medical facility to about 2,500 residents in outlying towns. Instead of driving an extra 40 miles around the hillside, trucks could traverse Old Oak Pass and deliver essential shipments within half an hour. At one spot along Old Oak Pass, near the rear boundary of a corner lot in Lakecrest Heights, sat an inconspicuous metal gate. It wasn't large or particularly noticeable, just a sturdy, waist-high structure that swung inward, connecting the private property's boundary with Old Oak Pass. The county planning documents explicitly permitted the gate's existence to allow emergency or maintenance vehicles quick access. In fact, years earlier, the prior homeowner had voluntarily allowed the gate so medical deliveries could pass if the main route was blocked by roadwork or extreme weather. Over time, the arrangement proved invaluable. The gate was rarely used by residents themselves, but it served as a critical release valve in times of need, like heavy snowstorms or unexpected road closures. A key hung securely at the local fire station and another at the medical distribution center. No one complained. In fact, many neighbors barely realized it existed, as it was well shielded by hedges and a fence. That was about to change when Bernice Karen Andrews discovered it while walking her dog, Coco, one early autumn afternoon. She immediately deemed it an unapproved access point that violated HOA guidelines. Bernice had not always lived in Whitehaven Springs. She and her husband, Richard, moved to Lakecrest Heights 3 years earlier from a different, even more regimented HOA community. Within a year, Bernice joined the local architectural committee, where she quickly developed a reputation for nitpicking, arguing that porch lights were the wrong wattage, or that certain mailboxes were too large. 6 months ago, when the HOA's vice president moved away, Bernice jumped at the chance to run for the newly vacant seat. She circulated flyers door to door, promising to enhance neighborhood standards and protect home values. Most residents barely paid attention. With little competition, Bernice sailed into the position unopposed. Now, as vice president, she was second only to HOA President Carlos Fuentes. an amicable retiree who believed in mild enforcement and polite reminders. Carlos hoped Bernice's energy might lighten his load, but soon he found her style oppressive. She constantly hounded him to issue formal complaints and threatened fines at the slightest provocation. Bernice's newest obsession was discovering hidden or illicit structures, fueled by her daily dog walks along the perimeter of Lakecrest Heights. Each time she noticed a shed that looked a touch bigger than standard guidelines, or a fence slat mismatched in color, she scribbled notes in her pocket-sized HOA rulebook. It was on one of these investigative strolls that she noticed a narrow path behind a row of trees at the far corner of the Weathers family's property. Out of pure curiosity, she followed the path, parted the branches, and discovered the metal gate opening onto Old Oak Pass. The padlock on the gate was open, dangling. Huh, Bernice muttered, leaning down to examine the locking mechanism. No official HOA sign, no mention in the neighborhood's blueprint, and the gate obviously allowed outsiders to enter the neighborhood's boundary. To her mind, this was a flagrant breach of security. She sniffed in disapproval. This has to go, she resolved, ignoring entirely that the road beyond wasn't just a random byway, but an emergency supply route. Bernice wasted no time. She walked straight home, typed up an official complaint letter on the HOA's stationery, and mailed it to Mr. and Mrs. Weathers. Subject: Unauthorized gate violation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Weathers, it has come to our attention that there is an unapproved metal gate at the rear of your property, connecting to an external path. This gate violates Lakecrest Heights Bylaw 11.3, which states that all fences, gates, and access points must be officially sanctioned by the HOA Architectural Committee. You are required to remove or permanently lock and disable this gate within 14 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in fines of up to $100 per day. Sincerely, Bernice Andrews, Vice President, Lakecrest Heights HOA. The Weathers were stunned. They had known about the gate since they bought the house 5 years prior. The property disclosure statements explicitly mentioned the county's easement agreement that allowed emergency services and the medical distribution center to access Old Oak Pass via that gate when needed. If anything, they believed they were doing the community a favor by leaving it available to authorized personnel. Confused, Mr. Weathers called Bernice, but she refused to budge. If it's not in the HOA's records, she snapped, it's not permitted. You either remove it or get a massive fine. When they mentioned the county's arrangement, Bernice waved it off. Oh, that's nonsense. I haven't seen any official letter. The HOA outranked some old handshake deal. The Weathers quickly notified the county planning office and the medical distribution center about the threat. But bureaucracy turned slowly. The Weathers were assured the original easement was valid. Meanwhile, Bernice was itching to enforce her new discovery. 2 weeks later, Bernice showed up at the Weathers' front door. She wore a neatly pressed suit jacket and clutched a clipboard. As soon as Mr. Weathers opened the door, Bernice said, "Your time is up. Where's the proof you removed or disabled that gate?" Mr. Weathers, exasperated, tried once more to explain. "We've contacted the county. We're waiting on official documentation. Please be patient." Bernice raised an eyebrow. "You had 14 days. Now you're in violation. The HOA will start fining you $100 a day." "That's insane," Mr. Weathers replied, voice tense. "This gate is legal. It's part of an essential access route for the medical distribution center. Trucks sometimes use it if the main highway is blocked." Bernice responded with a dismissive snort. "I've never seen a single truck go through that gate. You're fabricating stories to avoid compliance." At that moment, Mrs. Weathers came to the door, holding a folder. "We have partial records from the county. The final documents should arrive soon. This is a recognized easement." Bernice refused to even glance at the papers. "I'm not the county. I'm the HOA. Until we get official notice from them, and it better be signed and sealed by an authorized official, you're in violation. End of discussion." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "Your daily fines start tomorrow. Expect an invoice." Mr. Weathers stood there, incredulous, watching as Bernice pivoted on her heel and marched off. For the next week, the Weathers tried to escalate the matter, calling the HOA president, Carlos Fuentes, who sympathized but admitted Bernice was following protocol. They submitted the partial county records. Bernice, however, insisted on waiting for verified documents from the county clerk's office or else. Days stretched into weeks, and still the final county certificate confirming the easement was delayed by red tape. Meanwhile, the HOA's daily fines piled up, racking close to $700 in the first week alone. Behind the scenes, trouble began simmering. Over at the Whitehaven Springs Regional Medical Distribution Center, shipments were increasing due to a spike in seasonal flu and other routine health concerns. The center provided vital supplies, everything from fluids and medications to protective gear, for about 2,500 people in the smaller communities beyond Lakecrest Heights. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, an officer overseeing logistics at the center, had long been aware of the Old Oak Pass route. It was rarely used, but essential as a contingency. When a dispatch from the Weathers family reached her desk, alerting them to possible HOA interference, she grew concerned. "This can't be right," she told her colleague, flipping through the message. "We rely on that pass for faster deliveries in emergencies." Her colleague, Frank Stokes, shrugged. "HOA boards can be tough. We'll send them the official documentation. Let them know it's a county-sanctioned gate." Sarah nodded. "I'll make sure it's expedited." Unfortunately, administrative processes moved slowly. The county's planning department was juggling multiple projects. Meanwhile, nobody expected the crisis that was lurking around the corner, where the lack of that gate could spell disaster for residents relying on timely medical deliveries. Bernice was frustrated. She prided herself on being decisive, yet weeks had gone by with no final resolution about the gate. The Weathers refused to comply, the HOA president was dragging his feet, and the so-called official county documents still hadn't arrived. She grew convinced that the Weathers were stalling, trying to bypass the rules. One drizzly Monday afternoon, she decided enough was enough. She stormed into the local hardware store and purchased a new heavy-duty padlock and chain. If the Weathers wouldn't remove the gate, then she would secure it, making it non-functional and in line with her interpretation of the bylaws. That same evening, ignoring the fact she had no permission to alter someone else's property, Bernice sneaked around the fence line to the gate. She tested the gate's existing padlock. It was unlocked, as usual, to allow authorized access. Not anymore, she thought smugly. She looped her own thick chain around the metal bars, securing it with the industrial-grade padlock she'd just bought. Then she pocketed the key. As she finished, the Weathers' back porch light flicked on. Bernice froze. For a tense moment, she feared getting caught. But no one emerged. She quickly scurried back along the perimeter, congratulating herself on a job well done. Now, in her mind, the gate was effectively disabled, fulfilling the requirement that it no longer serve as a thoroughfare. She assumed the Weathers would have to contact the HOA to remove the chain and likely pay the mounting fines. Bernice believed she had single-handedly solved a big security risk. What she failed to grasp was that she had just blocked the only quick route for critical medical supplies, effectively cutting off 2,500 residents from their crucial deliveries if the main highway encountered any disruption. 2 days later, a freak mudslide occurred about 15 miles away, following an unseasonably heavy rainstorm in the hills. The main highway leading to the outlying towns was buried under mud, rocks, and uprooted trees. Authorities quickly closed the road for safety, announcing it might take at least a week to clear. That meant the Whitehaven Springs Regional Medical Distribution Center had only one practical alternative to get shipments out quickly: Old Oak Pass. The local roads that branched from Old Oak Pass could circumvent the mudslide area, ensuring clinics and pharmacies in the region received their supplies. Lieutenant Sarah Kim jumped into action. She organized a fleet of trucks to take Old Oak Pass. Among the cargo were antibiotics for local clinics dealing with a pneumonia outbreak, insulin supplies for diabetic patients, and other life-saving materials. Time was critical. If deliveries were delayed, many individuals in remote locations would risk going without vital medicines. The first truck rumbled along Old Oak Pass without issue until it reached the locked gate. The driver, Tom Richards, parked and approached the gate as he had done in occasional practice runs. He expected to find the usual padlock, for which he carried an official key. To his confusion, he discovered 2 locks, the old one, dangling, as normal, and a brand new, imposing padlock threaded through a thick chain. His key didn't fit the new lock. He radioed back to the distribution center. "I can't open the gate. There's a new lock. Somebody changed it." Inside the distribution center's control office, Lieutenant Kim's radio crackled with Tom Richards' anxious voice. She felt her stomach clench. New lock? Did the county or the Weathers family mention any changes? Not that I know of, Tom said. But there's definitely a chain here, and it's not the standard county issue lock. Sarah immediately grabbed her phone, calling the local fire station that also had a key on file. They were equally puzzled. No one had informed them of any change. Frank Stokes, overhearing the call, muttered a curse under his breath. This must be that HOA fiasco. They threatened to shut down the gate. Sarah's face darkened. She remembered the Weathers email about the overzealous HOA vice president. We can't afford a delay. People need these supplies. We'll have to cut the chain. Or we call the Weathers family for permission, Frank suggested. We can't just start breaking locks on private property, though. The Weathers gave us access, so presumably we have a right, but we need to confirm. Sarah nodded. I'll call them. Meanwhile, Tom, stand by. But the Weathers, when reached by phone, were equally shocked and furious. We didn't do that, Mr. Weathers insisted. It must have been Bernice from the HOA. She's been threatening to lock it. Then we have your permission to remove it. Sarah asked. Yes, absolutely, Mr. Weathers said. Go ahead and cut it off if you must. It's not ours. We had no idea she would go this far. Tom Richards, the truck driver, pulled out a bolt cutter from his supplies, ready to snap the chain. But just as he lined up the tool's jaws around the padlock, a voice shrieked from the yard behind the fence. What are you doing? That's private property. He turned to see Bernice Andrews marching across the grass in slippers and a robe, her face flushed with anger. She waved her arms. Get away from that gate. You're trespassing. Tom lifted his phone. Ma'am, I have authorization from the property owners to access this gate. I have to deliver medical supplies. Bernice sneered. I'm the HOA vice president. This gate is unauthorized. We locked it to enforce regulations. He stared, baffled. But the Weathers family says it's allowed, that there's a county easement. Bernice snorted. That's not recognized by our HOA. You break that lock, and I'll have you arrested for vandalism. Tom radioed back to Lieutenant Kim, who, overhearing the confrontation, urged him to proceed if the Weathers gave permission. But Tom was a cautious man. The presence of a furious homeowner association official threw him off. He worried about potential legal ramifications. Within minutes, a local police patrol car arrived, summoned by the distribution center's request for assistance. 2 officers stepped out, sizing up the bizarre situation. A medical delivery truck waiting at a locked gate, an HOA official in a bathrobe claiming vandalism, and a driver holding bolt cutters. Officer Danielle Perez took the lead. She asked each party to explain themselves. Tom showed his official documents, the medical cargo manifest, and an authorization letter stating the Weathers allowed the distribution center to use the gate. Bernice thrust forward the HOA bylaws, pointing to the clause about unapproved gates. Officer Perez flipped through the bylaw pages, then glanced at Tom's paperwork. Ma'am, she said to Bernice, these deliveries are critical. The property owners gave permission. Bernice glared. The HOA overrides them. This gate is an eyesore, a security threat. We never approved it. Officer Perez shook her head. Ma'am, I'm not seeing anything indicating the HOA has precedence over a legal county easement. The Weathers can have a gate if the county allows it. Bernice's face twisted. They do not have that easement. I requested official documentation and never received it. They're lying. It's not a matter of lying, Tom interjected. We have a partial letter from the county. The final records are delayed, but the owners gave us access. Officer Perez looked at her partner. The partner shrugged, indicating there was no immediate legal basis to keep the gate locked if the property owners consented to the center's use. We can't forcibly block an authorized route for essential services, Officer Perez concluded firmly. Bernice trembled with rage. I'll sue you all for trespassing on private property. But the Weathers had already made it clear the distribution center had their blessing. The police informed Bernice that continuing to obstruct the gate could lead to charges of her own if medical deliveries were jeopardized. In that tense standoff, Bernice refused to unlock her chain. You want it open? Let the Weathers come do it themselves. I paid for this lock. Nobody else has a key. She stomped back toward her house, ignoring the officer's warnings. With Bernice gone and the Weathers at work, the driver had 2 choices: wait for the Weathers to arrive with proof or proceed to cut the chain. He hesitated, wanting explicit instructions. The clock was ticking. Lieutenant Kim decided they had no time to spare. "Cut the chain," she instructed over the radio. "We have the owner's verbal and written permission. The officer on scene can witness it." With Officer Perez looking on, Tom severed the thick chain in 2 mighty snaps. He swung open the gate, hopped back into his truck, and continued down Old Oak Pass to deliver supplies. It was a relief, but the fiasco caused a 2-hour delay. That same day, another truck encountered the same padlock. Bernice had returned and replaced the chain with another, even heavier one after Tom left. They had to cut that one too. More hours were lost. Lieutenant Kim grew furious. This repeated interference jeopardized deliveries. She contacted local authorities and demanded a cease and desist order for Bernice. Meanwhile, the Weathers were distraught at the mounting daily fines from the HOA. Over $2,000 now, and the possibility of Bernice's repeated sabotage. Little did anyone know that the situation was on the brink of catastrophe. Down in the outlying communities, certain medications were running perilously low. 2 days after the highway closure, a small clinic in Lakeshore Valley, one of the remote towns, found itself critically short on antibiotics. A pneumonia outbreak had already hospitalized several elderly residents. Without immediate resupply, the clinic risked losing patients. Dr. Monica Gomez, the clinic's lead physician, called the distribution center in a panic. "We need that shipment tonight. I have at least 4 patients in serious condition." Lieutenant Kim assured her they were doing everything possible, explaining the route issues with the locked gate. Dr. Gomez, incredulous, asked how a single locked gate could hold up life-saving medicine for thousands. Elsewhere, a dialysis center in Rockton reported they were dangerously low on supplies, with more patients scheduled for treatments the next day. They, too, were counting on trucks passing through Old Oak Pass to beat the clock. As news trickled in, the seriousness of the gate blockade became undeniable. The local news station even picked up the story of an HOA official's meddling with an emergency supply route. One dramatic headline read, "HOA lock blocks vital medical supplies, 2,500 residents at risk." Bernice's name wasn't mentioned yet, but the rumor mill in Lakecrest Heights churned furiously. Many suspected her involvement. Even the HOA president, Carlos Fuentes, was appalled. He called Bernice repeatedly, pleading for her to stand down. But Bernice refused, claiming she was protecting the neighborhood from unregulated entry. Caught in the glare of public scrutiny, Bernice doubled down. She posted a lengthy statement on the neighborhood's online forum titled, "Why Our Neighborhood Security Matters." She wrote, "Fellow residents, it has come to my attention that certain parties are using our private property to transport questionable materials. The so-called medical supplies might indeed be legitimate, but we have no verification. This gate is an unauthorized access point. I have locked it for the safety of our community. Any real emergency can request official HOA consent. I refuse to let outside interests violate our neighborhood's sanctity. If the county or the Weathers produce legal proof, I will reconsider. But until then, do not believe fearmongers who claim we're putting lives at risk. We must maintain security in Lakecrest Heights. Sincerely, Bernice, Karen, Andrews, HOA Vice President. Keeping our neighborhood safe." The post triggered a firestorm. Residents lambasted her for playing gatekeeper with potential life-saving shipments. A few supporters voiced that she was protecting them from unknown trucks, but the vast majority saw her stance as heartless and dangerous. President Carlos Fuentes responded publicly, urging Bernice to remove the lock and disclaiming that the HOA had never authorized such an action. He wrote that the board would hold an emergency meeting to discuss her breach of protocol. But Bernice wasn't swayed. In her eyes, she was the hero safeguarding Lakecrest Heights from infiltration. She clung to the notion that no official county letter had arrived yet. They truly were stuck in bureaucratic backlog, so she had every right to keep that gate shut. While Bernice argued online, real crises were unfolding. The pneumonia situation worsened in Lakeshore Valley. One elderly patient nearly died, saved only after the clinic staff pooled leftover supplies from neighboring centers. Meanwhile, the dialysis center teetered on the brink of shutting down operations for lack of sterilized tubing. Lieutenant Kim contacted the county commissioner, explaining that repeated attempts to cut Bernice's locks were leading to daily conflicts. Bernice kept returning to rechain the gate. The county commissioner called an emergency meeting with the local judge, who promptly issued a court injunction against Bernice Andrews, forbidding her from locking, blocking, or in any way obstructing that gate. Officers arrived at Bernice's house that afternoon to serve her the injunction. She answered the door with frosty politeness, read the document, and then smirked. You can't enforce this if the gate is on private property. The HOA has rules. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. One of the officers, clearly frustrated, explained that ignoring a court injunction was indeed a criminal offense. If you continue to lock that gate, Ms. Andrews, you'll face arrest. Bernice's eyes flickered. Arrest? For protecting our neighborhood? Ridiculous. Nonetheless, she refused to sign. Meanwhile, the local news coverage intensified. One report featured interviews with Dr. Gomez and some of the people desperate for supplies. Public sentiment turned sharply against Bernice. On social media, she was branded as a Karen par excellence, placing personal pride over human lives. Within Lakecrest Heights, tensions peaked. Many neighbors had never liked Bernice's iron-fisted approach, but they tolerated it. Now, however, they were outraged that her bullheadedness jeopardized not just them, but also thousands beyond. The board convened an emergency HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. A standing room-only crowd gathered, including local journalists, the Weathers, and Lieutenant Kim. Bernice sat at the front table, arms crossed. President Carlos Fuentes opened the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address the situation involving the locked gate on the Weathers property, used for medical supply deliveries. First, let me clarify. The HOA board never approved sealing or removing that gate. We do not condone Ms. Andrews' unilateral decision. He turned to Bernice, voice tight. Do you have anything to say before we proceed with this hearing? Bernice stood, smoothed her blazer, and declared, I have always acted in the best interest of Lakecrest Heights. The gate was never authorized by our records. It allows random trucks to roll through private property, and we have no oversight. Until official county documentation arrives, I have every right to secure it for public safety. A murmur of anger swept the crowd. Someone shouted, You're endangering lives. Another yelled, Open the gate and stop the nonsense. President Fuentes banged the gavel for order. We have reviewed the partial county easement documents. We've also received a directive from local law enforcement about the necessity of this access route. Ms. Andrews, your refusal to comply with repeated legal warnings places you, and by extension the HOA, in serious jeopardy. We stand to face lawsuits and possibly worse. Bernice opened her mouth to retort, but Fuentes cut her off. We, the board, moved to suspend Ms. Andrews from her vice president duties, effective immediately, pending a full inquiry. The hall erupted in applause and cheers, as well as some scattered boos from Bernice's lone supporters. Bernice tried to respond, but her microphone was cut off. Several board members escorted her from the stage. Yet, even suspension did not guarantee she would stop. The question loomed, would she accept the board's decision or continue her crusade? Despite her official suspension, Bernice refused to relinquish her sense of power. She saw the board's action as a temporary setback, fueled by cowardice in the face of public pressure. In her mind, the real truth hadn't emerged. 2 nights after her suspension, while everyone hoped the saga would end, Bernice made one last brazen move. Under cover of darkness, she crept out to the gate again, this time with an industrial welding kit borrowed from a cousin who worked in construction. Feverishly, she welded the gate shut along its hinge line. Sparks flew in the darkness, and the acrid smell of molten metal filled the air. She forced the hinges to fuse so no one could open the gate. This was no mere padlock. This was a permanent seal that would require serious tools or entire gate replacement to fix. Her breath ragged, Bernice stood back, surveying her work with grim satisfaction. She believed she had struck a definitive blow. Now they can't keep cutting locks, she muttered. They'll have to get proper authorization if they want to open it again. Across town, the Weathers slept, unaware that Bernice was vandalizing their property in direct violation of a court injunction. By morning, the medical distribution center discovered the gate was immovable. Repeated attempts to open it failed. The Weathers rushed to the backyard to find the metal scorched and fused at the hinges. They called the police, incensed that Bernice had once again sabotaged them. Worse, a new wave of urgent orders had just come in from Lakeshore Valley and beyond. The highway was still blocked by cleanup crews struggling with layers of mud. The only realistic route for timely deliveries was Old Oak Pass, which was now effectively sealed. Word of Bernice's welding stunt ignited a public outcry. Residents took to social media, calling for her arrest. The local news station ran a headline: HOA official welds gate shut, blocking life-saving supplies. The mayor called an emergency press conference, denouncing Bernice's actions. Meanwhile, Dr. Gomez's clinic was desperate. The pneumonia outbreak persisted, and new patients were arriving. The dialysis center was turning away late-stage patients because they lacked the right equipment. The ripple effect was staggering. One local official declared, "This is not just an HOA matter anymore. We have a public health crisis on our hands." By noon that day, law enforcement arrived en masse at Bernice's home, accompanied by county officials and an arrest warrant. With cameras rolling, they knocked on her door. Bernice opened it, arms folded, trying to appear calm. But the tension in her eyes betrayed her. "Bernice Andrews," said Officer Perez, who had confronted her at the gate days earlier, "you are under arrest for criminal contempt of court, vandalism, and reckless endangerment." Bernice's cheeks drained of color. "This is outrageous. I'm an HOA vice president. I was suspended." "That's irrelevant, ma'am," Officer Perez replied. "You violated a court injunction. You welded private property shut, blocking a critical medical route. You're coming with us." Bernice sputtered as they read her Miranda rights. A small group of neighbors stood outside, some filming with their phones. When Bernice realized she was being led away in handcuffs, she wailed, "You can't do this. I was only following the rules." But no one believed that anymore. The fundamental rule she'd broken, disobeying a court order and risking thousands of lives, far outweighed any HOA regulation. Bernice's arrest reverberated through Lakecrest Heights. The board swiftly convened again, this time voting unanimously to remove Bernice from all HOA positions permanently. Residents demanded broader reforms to ensure no single board member could ever wield such unchecked power. As for Bernice, she faced a litany of charges. Criminal contempt for willfully disregarding a judge's injunction. Vandalism and trespassing for welding the Weathers Gate without permission and damaging their property. Reckless endangerment, tied to the fact her actions directly threatened the health and safety of over 2,500 residents who depended on the medical supply route. During the arraignment hearing, prosecutors pointed out the consequences of her gate sabotage. While no immediate deaths had been definitively traced to the delay, several patients suffered complications. The situation was precarious enough that any further obstructions could have been fatal. Bernice's attorney tried to argue she had misunderstood the legal status of the gate and had no idea it was so critical. But phone records, emails, and witness statements proved otherwise. She had been told repeatedly about the medical importance, served with an injunction, yet still chose to lock and then weld the gate. Sitting in court, Bernice appeared smaller than her once imposing demeanor suggested. Gone was the lofty arrogance. Now she wore the haunted look of someone who had realized her one-time sense of righteousness might land her in prison. Meanwhile, the Weathers filed a civil lawsuit against Bernice for property damage. The medical distribution center also pursued legal action, citing disruptions to their operations. Then came word from the local government that they might seek to recoup costs for emergency measures related to the fiasco, estimated at tens of thousands of dollars. Bernice's financial situation collapsed. Her husband, Richard, was blindsided, forced to consider mortgage refinancing to cover mounting legal fees. At the sentencing hearing, the judge summed up the situation. "Ms. Andrews, your obsessive enforcement of supposed HOA rules led you to disregard not only the explicit property rights of the Weathers family, but also multiple legal orders. More gravely, your actions impeded crucial medical deliveries for thousands of residents who rely on timely access to life-saving supplies. You have demonstrated a callous disregard for the welfare of others, which is unacceptable in a civilized society." The judge sentenced Bernice to 8 months in county jail for her criminal contempt and vandalism convictions, plus 3 years of probation. She was also required to pay substantial fines and restitution to the Weathers, the county, and the medical distribution center. In total, the financial judgment soared into the high 5 figures. Unable to meet these staggering costs, Bernice faced the seizure of her personal assets. Ultimately, her beloved home in Lakecrest Heights was placed under a lien. When she couldn't make the required payments, the property was foreclosed and confiscated by the bank. In the weeks that followed Bernice's incarceration, the Weathers, with help from the county and volunteers, replaced the welded gate entirely. This time, they installed a more robust design with a new official padlock system. Copies of the key were distributed to authorized parties, the fire department, the medical distribution center, and the Weathers themselves. The mudslide cleanup on the main highway took nearly a month, but thanks to the restored Old Oak Pass route, medical deliveries continued with minimal disruption. Clinics received their supplies, and the near disaster of withheld medications eased, though some patients had experienced frightening delays. Lakecrest Heights underwent a reckoning. Residents demanded transparency and checks on HOA power, culminating in new bylaws limiting unilateral actions by board members. Carlos Fuentes worked with the newly appointed vice president, a sensible, community-minded resident named Sharon McNeil, to establish open forums and more tolerant guidelines. No longer would a single person's vendetta or misunderstanding jeopardize lives. "We learned a hard lesson," Mr. Fuentes told the local news. An HOA exists to foster a welcoming, safe environment, not to subvert county easements or block essential services. Bernice Karen Andrews served her jail sentence, mostly in silent bitterness. Rumors suggested she railed against the injustice of it all, convinced she'd been wronged. But the facts were clear. Her unwavering belief in her own authority had caused a chain reaction threatening the well-being of thousands. By the time she was released, she no longer possessed a home in Lakecrest Heights, foreclosed to satisfy court-ordered payments. She moved out of Whitehaven Springs entirely, her reputation in tatters. Neighbors who once cowered under her scrutiny now regarded her name as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what can happen when personal obsessions overshadow communal good. As for the gate, it became a modest symbol of civic responsibility, standing at the edge of the Weathers property, unobtrusive yet vital. Each time a truck passed through, carrying supplies for far-flung clinics or senior centers, it underscored the lesson that sometimes a small path can be a lifeline. In a quiet corner of Whitehaven Springs, people still share the story of how an overzealous HOA Karen locked a gate and nearly locked away the hopes and health of thousands. It's a tale of how fragile a community's well-being can be in the face of ignorance and pride, and how quickly the might of the law can descend upon those who jeopardize public safety.